the Darkwood Pictures logo that pops up here. We were prepping the movie in Northern Arkansas, and my producer, Emoto Harney, mocked up that logo while we were eating dinner one night at a hibachi restaurant. Just mocked it up in one night, and I loved it so much that it became the logo for our production company. The title card here, the intentional use of the screener copy title card is the cause of a lot of, shall we say, confusion. A lot of people in the film industry are familiar with seeing things like that on early rough cuts of a film. It's put there to indicate that, this isn't done, this is a work in progress, and, this is not meant to be seen by the public. But, when it came out, I wanted to use that because I always thought that the conceit of this film is that it's created as Mark's sort of master plan, his way to gain success and notoriety. And so he's releasing it believing that he's anonymous in its release and that he hasn't implicated himself in the murder of his 3 friends. And so he's creating something that might look like it has been leaked out before it was meant to be. Like it was real. It was this real thing that happened, and it's escaped of its own volition, kind of. And so he's using that as a way to do it. But when the film came out on Netflix and Amazon, other places, all of my friends called me up immediately after seeing that and said, "Oh, you're not gonna believe this. They left the screener copy title card on your film when they put it out on wide release." And I had to assure everyone that no, that was a choice. In fact, there was a point where I'd even added directed by Mark Brennan onto that card to try to really drive home the fact that it was intentional, because obviously it wasn't directed by a fictional character, although there are times when maybe I wished it was. But there was a gaffe in one of the props in which, on a shipping label, the props department mistakenly put his name as Mark Smith on the prop, and so the stickler that I am, maybe to my own detriment, felt like I couldn't call him Mark Brennan, but I also didn't want to use the name Mark Smith because it's so just generic and fake almost, and so I removed that from the title card, and I guess that's added to the confusion a little bit.
Just remember to hit record next time. What?
The RV, we wrote this thing, and I always thought that they should be in an RV, and it should be this kind of road trip movie thing, and thinking that, it would just be easy to buy the shittiest, cheapest RV we can find, and that is then like a major set piece for 20-25% of the movie. We're good. We park it. We could shoot in a studio for a bunch of stuff and have complete control over it. Without having to build a set from scratch. And the search for this RV was largely me just scanning through Craigslist and I think Facebook Marketplace and just looking for something that was adequately shitty, but that was still functional. It turned out to be a lot more complicated than I had initially thought. And but the place we ended up finding it was actually right across the street from our other producer and director of photography, Randall Blizzard. His father lives in Fayetteville, Georgia, which is over near Pinewood Studios now resides, and we basically grew up there and shot a lot of our movies as young kids there and stuff, and so the fact that we found this RV almost literally right across the street from that place after searching far and wide across Georgia was serendipitous and very funny. These are cameras that I own through my production company, RCR Video C300s. We use them a lot for commercial and corporate work, and they're perfect for that, and they're also perfect for run and gun filmmaking. I think they're the same camera that like Vice News will use and other similarly produced run and gun ENG style things.
Seriously, way to make me feel like a whore. Fourth wall. Hello.
We reshot this scene, I think maybe twice even. I'm pretty sure Haley's coverage is from one shoot day, and then their coverage is from another shoot day. I can't remember which one was the reshoot and which one wasn't. Scene was much longer in earlier versions of the script, and even the version we shot was much longer, and I just really felt the need to cut it down to the bone. There's a lot of exposition in here. There was a lot about covering up the red recording lights on the camera so that people don't know we're filming, and making sure we understand that the microphones are on the characters. They're wearing wires, or called lavalier mics, the whole time, because they're going to be just walking around interviewing people, and we needed to justify why you're able to always hear their dialogue somewhat clearly. So there was a whole bit in there about how people used to leave their lavalier microphones on when they go to the bathroom, and you can hear people micturating or defecating or what have you. But we cut that back. There's a small piece coming up here where Ryan, Brooke Todd's character, taps the lavalier mic that he is wired up with, and she says, "Don't hit it," or something like that. And I just felt like that was probably enough. I mean, it's very, very subtle and very quick, but I just felt like we don't need to kind of like spoon feed this information to the audience. And maybe it should have been a little more explicit. Maybe not. I don't know. The extra in the back right, or sorry, back left there, is name is Jimmy Bolton. He was one of our production assistants and also works for Dustin LeBlue, who's the executive producer of the film, and it was super helpful. Just one of these guys that just was willing to do anything. He used to be a whatever you call those guys, like climb trees and cut down limbs and stuff. So he used to do really, really physical, hands-on work, and then started working for Dustin as like a graphic designer or something. I don't know, something where it's like working behind computers, working on creative stuff, and he was invaluable during this process.
Winter of '74 and shut down in the fall of '79.
These are outside of this guy. That's Randall, our DP and producer, and myself, who I didn't want to make a cameo, and neither did Randall. But we shot a whole series of these man on the street interviews, and with local actors from Little Rock and Springfield and St. Louis, and it was scripted, and having spent time up here, it just never felt authentic to me. It never felt like you had those weird eccentricities of the locals, and so yeah, I mean, I work on these commercials a lot where they bring in actors and they're supposed to be like, oh, I travel a lot and I always carry this particular bag and it helps me, and it's all supposed to ring as like, oh, this is just a person that we pulled out of a crowd to talk to us, and it just it's one way to do things, but it never really rings true. So while unfortunately Randall and I made cameo appearances simply for utility purposes, because we needed to insert some very specific exposition into this montage. Everyone else they're real people, and they were not prepped. This series of reshoots was all people that they gathered, friends of Dustin and Jimmy and other people. I think the older man with the beard is actually Jimmy's father. And this is Dino, so he was a production assistant of ours. But again, for the most part, these people are all real people, and we're just asking them real questions. This guy, probably the most harrowing in the montage, was completely real. Nothing about that was coached or staged or scripted or anything. And I just thought that added the level of authenticity that we needed, and that kind of balanced out the very very obviously shoehorned exposition that Randall and myself were delivering. This church was was tricky. We had a church locked in. They backed out during the middle of shooting. We went to scout another church that looked okay, and on the way to that scout, we passed this church, and we just walked in, and it was unlocked. We were just able to walk in and look around, and no one was there or anything, and we just thought it was great. I mean, the location was great. It kind of structurally lent itself to what we needed. We needed a place that you could believe that there was there were living quarters in the basement of it, which of course we shot on a stage, but we needed it to at least look from the outside that it could house living quarters underneath, and this just kind of lent it to exactly what we needed. And the people were super cool. They were like, yeah, as long as you're not coming by on Sunday, just give us some money and do what you need, which was amazing. Most of these extras are crew members of ours. In fact, the person in the front left there in the green sweater with the hat on is actually, we segregated the church just because I thought that it made sense, this Midwestern sort of old-fashioned misogynist sensibility that you find a lot in these types of churches. I thought it would be funny and maybe it's a little too over the top, but we segregated the church. But the person I just pointed out with the sweater and the hat that's sitting on the female side of the aisle is actually our sound person, who is a man disguised essentially in drag as a woman to sit in the front row and hold a microphone and get clean audio of Jason McDonald delivering his sermon. The gun, this is kind of a cardinal rule in filmmaking, to show a gun and not use it. But what I wanted to do with that was actually lean into that that conceit where you expect to see a gun used when you show it, and what I wanted to do is show the gun and then have it vanish later, and then we don't know who has it, and we're, as an audience, expecting it to be used, and that inadvertently creates some tension. I don't know if it worked or not, but that was my intention. And Pastor Youngblood brings these glasses out. There are 6 glasses of tea. There are only 5 people here in the room, so it's a precursor. It's a foreshadowing the fact that there is another person there that they are not aware of yet. Jason McDonald. Jason McDonald's a good friend of mine, a fantastic actor. And kudos to him. We reshot this scene because of some technical problems with one of the cameras in the first shoot. We had to shot the movie in November of 2016, and we had to go back to Arkansas to shoot pickups. I had a reshoot schedule in, I think, January or February of 2017. And this was one of the things that we had to reshoot. Again, only one of the angles in this scene is reshot, and one is the original shoot. So it's a testament to how strong these actors were, that they were able to deliver consistent performances months apart from one another. Jason McDonald, I didn't even have him in mind for this, to be honest. I had a very specific idea of what I thought that Pastor Youngblood should be, and I just wasn't able to coax it out of the actors that auditioned. They were all great, but they had a take on it that wasn't what I had envisioned, and so I was, I was basically ready to compromise on what this character was going to be. But then, out of the blue, Jason McDonald, who I think was coaching some other people who were auditioning for other roles, maybe Leslie or Mark or someone, and he saw the breakdowns. Somehow he saw the breakdown, and he reached out to me personally and said, "Hey, would it be okay if I auditioned for this part of Pastor Youngblood?" Which I think was it was a different name at the time. It was something else. We actually renamed the pastor based on the graveyard location that we found. We found a bunch of graves that said Youngblood, or maybe it was that, or the on Google Maps the cemetery was actually called Youngblood Cemetery. So we changed the character name to match the name of that family cemetery, just to create some sort of continuity there, or in case we were able to in case people were going to look up the cemetery or that we were at, or if we saw a grave with the name Youngblood on it, we wanted to be able to tie it to the character there. But anyway, Jason asked if he could audition, and I said, you hadn't occurred to me for this, but yeah, please, absolutely audition. And he sent me a tape. He didn't blink. he has this not monologue, it's basically a monologue, but he has this whole spiel here in which he didn't blink one time during the whole entire audition, and I was like, this is exactly what this needs to be. This is not only what I envisioned, but almost kind of better than what I envisioned. So so he stole the part.
How do you know all this?
Like I said, my family has kept very extensive records of our history.
So these are your relatives we're talking about?
Teddy, someone I had always had in mind for this. He did audition. We auditioned a lot of people for this role, but I'd worked with Teddy previously on a film that will not be named, and I just felt that if I could stack the deck in my favor in terms of like if I could cast as many actors that I had worked with before, that would allow me to have a better familiarity with them and allow me to create characters that were closer to who they really were. Because, again, it's a found footage movie. The idea is to make it feel like a documentary outside of course, Jason's character is clearly a caricature of some kind, and it's meant to feel very out of place. But outside of that, I wanted our key characters here, our principals, to feel very real, and I wanted to feel like we were just experiencing this moment in these people's lives. I didn't want it to be, very presentational, actory. I wanted it to just be like observational, almost cinema verite, documentary style. And I thought, and I'm not saying this was the right choice, but my idea going into it was to cast, friends of mine. Friends of mine and people that I'd worked with before, so that I could mold these characters into just fictionalized versions of themselves, and that would help me create that sort of authenticity in who they were, because they weren't acting that much. They were saying lines, but they were saying lines as themselves. And I think it works. Ace, is playing himself in the film. I mean, he's very literally playing himself. The others, have their character names. Ace is literally playing himself, and he's not an actor at all. He's a camera operator, sound mixer. He does a lot of stuff on the crew side of filmmaking, but he's not primarily an actor. But I just thought that this is what the movie needs. It needs Ace. Like, if I could just make a character that's like a carbon copy of Ace for this movie, he's perfect. He balances out the seriousness of what everyone else is bringing to the table. He provides that comic relief. He kind of has that sort of like chill mentality that I just thought that he brought something. If Ace were this character, it would really bring a great group dynamic into it. So it took a lot of convincing to get him to agree to do this. But at the end of the day, we went in, and Emoto, our producer, again, was instrumental in this as well, because she is Ace's sister. And so she and I sat down during prep and went through the entire script and rewrote, honestly, a lot of Ace's dialogue to make it, to convert it to his vernacular, to make this character talk the way that Ace talks. And who better to know that than his sister of 35 years.
Right now, from what I can tell, the place is not far from here at all.
What, did you hit the feeling lucky button on Google Maps?
There's a small clearing just through the woods. This has to be it.
So you're telling me we need to go trudging through the woods?
I tried to do some visual effects on this shot, because I wasn't sure. There is no catch light on her here, so it's already kind of hard to see her eyes. And I had an idea that, to really drive home the point that she's seeing something on the camera screen that's causing her to sort of lock up and her heart to stop almost. I thought that we could bolster that idea by digitally going in and adding reflection of the camera screen in her eyes as a catchlight, but we could just never get it right. I did a lot of tests and tracking and stuff with it, and it never looked real to me, so we ended up scrapping that idea. Another thing, it's a big point of contention with people, and probably the biggest the biggest negative reaction to the film, or the most consistent negative reaction to the film, has been the use of the camera sound, the clicking and popping that you get with the operation of the camera. That usually it comes from the microphone that is built into the camera. There's a little mono microphone that's built into the back of these C300 cameras that's kind of designed not to be used at all in a production, but is designed as, a bit of like a reference track if you're needing to maybe synchronize sound to a more clean source, or if if your camera operator wants to speak to the editor or whoever's going to be viewing the footage later. There's a place, that it gives them the ability to kind of give on-the-fly notes on what they're filming, especially in documentary settings. So those microphones were on always at all times while we were filming this movie, and I just had this idea the whole time that we should hear that, even though it actually isn't particularly realistic, because they are using external shotgun microphones that are mounted on top of the camera, that are mounted with shock mounts that technically will remove that microphone noise, that popping and clicking that you hear. When you watch the movie without that sound, because we stripped it all away initially in the sound mix, Jeff Jones, amazing sound designer. Of course, on his first pass, what you're kind of trained to do is to present the cleanest, most intelligible pass of the dialogue and everything that you can, and he did that. He stripped away all the camera sound. He used just the microphones, and we did a lot of ADR for this film, and made it sound really clean. And it just felt so just sterile to me, and it felt unrealistic for some reason. Inhabiting the point of view of, and acknowledging the fact that we are viewing this through a subjective point of view through an actual digital camera, and being aware and actually showing and not trying to mask the fact that you do normally in narrative film. You're trying to, or at least I am always trying to, remove anything that makes the audience aware that they are watching a movie, and not wanting to shatter the veil of this experiencing this story or this world. I'm always trying to do things to make the camera not evident. But this is the polar opposite of that. The camera is very evident, and we play into it, we lean into it, we use it as a prop. Even as it is the gateway into the story, it's a lot of times being used as a prop, and that's kind of the conceit of found footage films. And it just didn't feel right to me to have such a clean, crisp soundtrack for something that was just kind of so presented in such a sort of like dirty, not quite so pristine manner. Now, I'll be the first to admit that we probably overdid it on the sound, and Jeff, even when we did reintroduce it, Jeff did say, like, you don't want to muddy up the track. Like, it's okay to have it in there a little bit kind of subtle if that's what you want. That makes sense, but we really need to keep it dialed back, because it's going to get in the way of people watching the movie. And I just could not be reasoned with. For some reason, I just was so adamant about having this camera sound, which is actually, and this is, I'll admit as well, is it's not the camera sound that you hear in the film that most people abhor is actually not the diegetic camera sound. It's actually not the sound from when we were actually shooting. It's actually me. While we were doing our rounds of ADR dubbing for the film, I actually sat down and watched the whole entire cut and held one of these exact cameras in my hand and recreated as best as I could the movement that the characters were making, and that the movement that the camera was making in each shot, every moment, like in real time. I would watch the film, and I would move the camera and shake it in ways that created a sound that would be a clean track of what you would be hearing if we had activated those mics during filming, and recorded that, matched it up to to the edit and sent that over to Jeff to add into the mix. And I don't necessarily think that was the wrong move, but maybe we overdid it, and I'll take full responsibility for that. It's also really against the idea of including score in the film initially, but I did feel like there needed to be something here, so I came up with the idea of some creepy organ music that's playing somehow from somewhere. We don't ever actually really identify the source of it, but it's there. The location that was actually going to be the living quarters here of the church was a house that we had. The location fell through at one point, so we were scrambling. Then it came back, so we felt okay. And then right before we were scheduled to shoot, it fell through again. So we had to throw this set together last minute, and it is a set. It is a part of the facility that is the Millbrook. It's a part that was kind of had these primitive sort of office areas constructed, and we went in and built some extra walls and dressed it up with all of this furniture and everything, and all of that, and turned it into what we thought could pass as a living quarters. And I actually think it works really well, because if we'd shot in the home that we planned to, it would have given you that sort of creepy being in a weird person's home at night kind of feel, but it wouldn't have felt kind of like this feels false. Like, you look at the walls and you look at the way it's constructed, and like it feels like a facade of some kind. And I think that actually lends itself to the story just as good in a different way, if not better, than using the actual house location would have. All of these props and set dressing, I believe, were sourced locally in Arkansas. Fantastic production designer, Jennifer Chandler, and her team. And I say her team, she had a very, very small team. And what she was able to pull off with what she had is remarkable. These photographs, I think, came from not a pawn shop, but an antique store of some kind. I think that, or I honestly don't know. I think that they just rounded up a bunch of weird old photographs that I just thought were kind of great because they were real. We didn't. I don't think any of these were created and aged and manufactured. I think we just found authentic vintage photographs, and then for instance, wrote that kind of stuff on there to make them fit the story. Worked really hard to get the right sound out of those footsteps. I knew exactly what it needed to be. I wanted it to feel like a scurry. Like, we've only seen Pastor Youngblood, and I wanted it to be a sound that makes you understand that movement, that sound was not caused by anyone that we've seen thus far. It sounds almost like a small child. A church at night is creepy in and of itself. I don't think you really need to do much to augment the creepiness of a location like this. The woman in this scene, Janice Dooley, I believe is a local actor, and she really embodied this character. There were takes where she just went crazy, and we shot a lot of takes in this movie, and I don't want to fall into that trap of we're just searching for perfection and we're really gonna shoot takes all day long to get what we needed. And it was more to me about the fact that these scenes, many of these scenes, because it's found footage, I didn't want to use jump cutting as a crutch, although we did kind of in editing make some adjustments and do a lot with jump cutting. But I didn't want to go into editing with believing that I could use that to band-aid problems. What I wanted to do was, if possible, let every scene play out uncut from a single angle. And so that, when you're not able to save anything in coverage, when you're not able to save anything in an edit, it really kind of dictates the precision of those takes. So, the nature of shooting that way means that you're going to have to shoot 30, 40 takes of these setups to get everything timed just right, from the camera operation to the staging to the sound, everything. You can't cover up mistakes the same way that you could when you're shooting a normal scene with normal coverage. This is shot on a stage. This is one of the reasons I thought that procuring an RV would be helpful.
Fine. Jesus, you won't even let somebody else help you.
I don't need your fucking help!
There was a later take of this scene that I really liked. We changed one of Ryan's lines. He says in the movie now, I'm not willing to set myself on fire to get your fucking B-roll. There was a take where we changed that to, I'm not willing to break my leg to get your fucking B-roll. And it's meant to he gestures toward the camera where Ace is clearly, he's wearing a cast, a boot, the whole film. And we couldn't use the take because I think the timing was off. Something was off, and this earlier take was better. But I really like that line because it ties that into the story more. Ace's boot that he wears in the film is not something that we cooked up for the purpose of the film. Although I wish I could take credit. I guess I could take credit for it because the reason he has that boot on is because in our last week of rehearsals, right before we started shooting, we were going to this basketball court. We were playing basketball every night after we'd finish work. We'd go and play for a couple of hours. And one of the last days before we started shooting, we were playing basketball, and Ace, something happened. He came down on his foot wrong, and he ruptured his Achilles tendon. And, of course, we all went into panic mode, and I didn't know rupture just sounds like a serious thing, and I suppose it is, but, I didn't know how much that was going to affect us. Are we going to still continue to be able to shoot with him? There's a lot of running around in this movie, and luckily he'd had this happen before on his other leg, so he was familiar with how to respond to a crisis like this, and was able to get a boot and put it on, and we just knew that he had to wear it for several months in order for his Achilles tendon to heal properly. So what we did was just wind up writing that into the film. Like, he has to wear it, and we have to shoot, so there's no sense in trying to shoot around it. That's not really possible, so let's just put it in there. And then we were able to kind of turn that into, I always wanted to, because in found footage movies, you have to, there's always, it's kind of the joke now. It's like found footage filmmakers have to always find a reason for the camera to be rolling, and the lob, the toss up, the easy answer is, just film everything. Have a character say, just film everything. But I wanted to, at least root it in character for us, and for Ace, it's always like, film everything because you never know what you're gonna get. He says, I think in an earlier scene, like, we're not going to find, anything supernatural in this place. So the only thing we're going to get out of this is 4 friends going on a road trip. So we might as well film that. And then as he starts to witness drama like this relationship drama unfold, he becomes interested in that and wants to continue filming. But another part of his character is that he's willing to do anything to to get a cool shot. And there was an early draft of the script where there was this little story about how Ace ran into a burning building, was injured because he wanted to get this particular shot, this great footage of this building on fire, and was willing to be maimed in order to do so. And so what we did was just rolled in his actual real life injury into the story by saying that it's such a throwaway line too that you'd blink and you miss it, but that there's a point where Haley says to him, what happened to your leg, and he's like, don't worry about it, I got the shot. This scene was one of the first that I kind of cooked up in my mind when we first started working on the script for this. I just really, it was always so very clear to me. I really loved this idea of filming an interaction between two characters through this tiny sliver of visibility into the back. Where, I mean, if you look at that whole scene, 90% of the frame, something like 85-90% of the frame is just static wood panel walling, and these characters are having to present a performance through that little 10% sliver of the frame. And something about that always appealed to me. I just really loved the idea of, like, and it took a lot of work, it took a lot of staging, and we had to there was some concern about having our sound person in there because it's supposed to be this intimate thing. They're supposed to be away from everyone, having a private conversation. Of course, obviously forgetting that they are still Ryan is still wearing his lavalier microphone that is on and tied to Ace's camera. To Leslie's camera. We went through painstaking measures to make sure that the camera Ace was using was the one that was connected to the microphone that Ryan is still supposed to be wearing, so that we were able to hear their dialogue. Logically, we would be able to hear their dialogue even though they were in the back. We in real world, we had to capture their audio a little bit cleaner, and that involved us having to cram our sound guy into that back room along with them and have him remain out of frame and try to not be as distracting as possible. But I feel like we spent almost an hour trying to figure out how we could rig a microphone, how we could stick a boom microphone in there without having a sound person in there, so as to not distract the performance by having someone else in there, so they could just be alone in the back and have that interaction. But at the end of the day, it just wasn't feasible, and I had to go up to them and say, you guys are actors, so act like there's no one in the room with you. We reshot this scene so many times, and that moon that's in the reflection there in the mirror through this whole scene is real. It's practical, and maybe influence why we picked this take, because we just couldn't never get the timing right on this for some reason. I don't know what it was, but we reshot this. I mean, we must have shot 100 and something takes of this over the course of the entire shoot schedule. And it wasn't, we weren't being belligerent about it, because really all we needed was Brooke and Ace and our sound person and Randall, and we just needed a very small, a splinter unit to be able to shoot this scene. So we would do that. We'd wrap early, or we'd get started early or something, several times, and we'd go out and try and keep trying to nail this scene, and I just never, I still, if I'm being honest, still don't really feel great about it, but I don't know what it was. I don't know what it was about this.
Let me see that. Hit it. The necklace.
The necklace is an interesting plot device that I don't think works as well as I'd hoped, and it actually doesn't. There are two versions of the film. There's a version of the film that was our cut of the movie for months and months before it was released and before we turned it over to our distributors. There was a version of the film that's longer, and there's a whole subplot in which Leslie's character is pregnant and hiding the fact that she's pregnant from Mark because she's not ready to tell him. There's a whole subplot built around that, and where that comes into play is later, the scene where Ace is in the bathroom in the RV and he finds the necklace that was thrown out of the window. Instead, he found a positive pregnancy test, and then later there's a scene where he confronts Leslie about it, and I always loved that idea because of it. I think it adds to the horror of the final scene of the movie. She's gagged and can't explain to Mark that she is bearing his unborn child, and that if he murders her, he's murdering his child as well. And, as she's trying to scream and can't say anything and can't stop him, the train's left the station, her fate is sealed. And that just was so, like, gut-wrenching to me, and I really loved that. But at the end of the day, I think we came to the conclusion that it made the movie too long, and it was one too many threads to expect people to hold on to for a movie that is not going to be... No one's watching this movie looking for some high concept character drama, which I think ultimately is probably what I tried to turn the movie into, to its own detriment. But that exacerbated that problem, and so we ended up pulling that out. And luckily, I'd always intended to shoot alternate scenes to enable us to revert to this version of the film if ever necessary, and I held on to that pregnancy version as long as I could. And at the end of the day, and I'm not saying that I was coerced. Like, we made the decision together to remove that plot from the film and just simplify it as much as possible and shorten it, because if you're contextualizing the movie, people are not watching this movie again looking for a character study on these 4 people. They're watching this movie because they want to, put on a silly horror movie with a bunch of independent filmmakers in the background while they're doing something else. So the least information that you can give them to try to keep up with, I think, the better. And I know that now. I didn't know that then. As pretentious as I was, didn't know that then. This is on a stage. This scene is so funny. We were rehearsing this scene as they were, rigging the light gag outside the window there to make it look like we were driving, and we were trying to work through this problem of, like, how does he work the saran wrap and how does he reach into the trash can if he's filming this whole time. And originally it was going to be the C300, and I don't remember how we wound up deciding to give him the GoPro. But and I'm watching. So I'm watching the scene. I'm obviously not in the bathroom with him. We have Video Village somewhere else, and there's a wireless feed that's sending what the GoPro sees to us. So we're watching the rehearsals. We're going through the blocking, and I'm watching the screen, and Ace is suddenly reaches down with 2 hands and wraps the toilet with saran wrap, and I just kind of like, the fuck is what? And I got up and I went into the bathroom and I was like, what did you just do? How did you do that? And he's like, I put the GoPro in my mouth, and I'm able to do all that. And I just thought that was so genius. It's one of those things one of those happy accidents that you hope would happen. It's not even really a happy accident. It's just like one of those discoveries, one of those random discoveries that you find out during the process of making a film. That, like, I don't know why I love that so much. It's just how silly it is that we see him put the GoPro in his mouth so that he can set up his prank. Just thought it was amazing. I loved it.
Let's do it. All right.
I'll grab my jacket.
No, you guys stay here in case someone drives by.
There's a small clearing just up the road that should be perfect.
This never came together the way that I wanted it to, and I again take full responsibility for it. But I thought that was funny. Spin it around. People who operate drones, I think, will appreciate that joke. Everyone else probably won't. Did a lot of digital effects on these drone shots to mask out cars and roads and civilization. Things that we wanted to make this look as remote as possible. So a lot was done there. And in fact, the screen there where he's previewing what the drone is seeing is actually visual effects as well. But really well done visual effects. Kudos to the guys at Darkwood Pictures at Dustin's facility who were able to pull that off. I thought it turned out really well. But the malfunction of the drone, I just feel like I could never really get it to fail the way that I wanted it to. And there was a point also when we were supposed to, the drone is supposed to witness like a symbol or something drawn on the roof of the facility here right before it crashes. And we had, production design went up and mocked up that symbol, and it just didn't look right. I mean, I don't know how you would really do it. Maybe spray paint it on there. Of course, we weren't able to do that because we didn't want to have to paint back over it or anything. But so they mocked something up with tape that looked good, but just to me, just didn't look weird enough or creepy enough. And so we ended up ripping the whole thing up and just shooting the roof. And like, it doesn't really give you any, foreboding sense that the facility is going to present problems. So that's something I wish we'd have spent a little bit more time on. But the drone stuff was the very, very, very last thing we shot. I think it was something like the summer of 2017. We went back to screen. We went back to Arkansas to meet with Dustin and his team to screen the latest cut of the film, and the next day we went to shoot those drone shots. In fact, when we went to shoot them, there's a video of this on YouTube somewhere, because we had a guy with us that was kind of documenting the journey. We went to shoot the stuff, and our drone broke in transit. We flew in from Atlanta. We flew in to get to where we had to go. We had to fly into Springfield, Missouri, and drive down to northern Arkansas. And at some point during that trip, the drone was broken by a baggage handler or something. I don't really remember what the exact situation was, but we'd come all the way out to Arkansas, and our drone was broken, and we're like, well, where can we don't even know where we can get another one. How are we going to do this? We don't want to have to go home and come back out to Arkansas again to shoot these pickups, but it has to be this facility because you see it in other points of the movie, and so on and so on. What we finally were able to do was drive up to Branson, Missouri, to a Best Buy and buy the very last drone that they had available, and drive back down to Arkansas the next day and capture that footage finally. So that was the last little bit that we were able to capture. I really love this scene. I think that it's a lot of people's least favorite scene in the movie, but again, like, I just really love little things like this where actors are having to, portray intimacy from a vantage point that is, really far away and kind of observational and voyeuristic in a sense, and also B, when you're, again, like 10% of the frame. Like, there's this whole big giant static frame. It's actually artificially static because I think that there were little things that, like leaves that would blow by. I think there's a point when the boom mic drops into this take, and little things that would happen on the other parts of the frame that would kind of pull your attention away from it. And I hate stuff like that. I'm like, I want people to be locked in on this one tiny portion of the frame. Of course, people are going to look over at the mirrors and stuff, but I just didn't want anything moving to pull any attention. So we artificially, outside of them and their shadows, we artificially went in and made the frame static. And so all of the action, again, is just happening in this tiny, tiny little portion of the frame, and I think that's so fascinating. I love that kind of stuff. Maybe I'm the only one. Boom operator's actually on top of the RV right now. So it's a wonder. I think we all are as well. It's a wonder that the thing didn't shake the whole time. The placement of the GoPros on the RV were designed for, particular shots like this, and the shot where they're leaving the church and you see the pastor, he's revealed to be standing out just right there in front of the RV. We had manufactured their placement. It wasn't random, and, of course, motivated them by things that Mark intended to capture to be cut into the documentary. But the placement was very, very deliberate in that we knew that we wanted to capture these shots later on, and I knew always I wanted that scene to play out exactly, that previous scene to play out that way. And so their placement was designed for that, and then had to remain consistent all the way from the beginning of the movie to the end.
I didn't actually call anyone. Whoa.
What the fuck?
What?
I knew that if we had to wait for a tow truck, there'd be no way we can get there by midnight.
So you just lied to our fucking faces.
Why didn't you
There's
just tell us the truth?
some of these whip pans.
We're all
There's
the same team.
cuts hidden. I don't remember why. I think maybe these are different takes, even though it appears to be a single take all the way through. I think maybe these are different takes stitched together. Maybe it's obvious, but I always thought this shot looked almost too good because it's just kind of so perfect. The location we were at. I think we put up a silk to kind of diffuse the sunlight so it wasn't so harsh on their faces, which is what you'd normally do in a film. Again, in a narrative environment, you don't want to expose properly for the camera. You don't want really, really harsh highlights against really dark shadows, because the camera you'll lose either the shadows or the highlights. So you'll set up these big white sheets of diffusion that will diffuse the sunlight and make your shadows really soft, and there's not a whole lot of contrast on your subjects. So we did that for that, to expose for the camera. I kind of made it look too pretty. It looks too staged, and most of the film seems relatively run and gun, relatively realistic, like something you would just photograph going out into the world. But a lot of care was given to try to make sure that everything looked good, but still looked photorealistic if you were out in the woods without a crew of 25 people. The scene is a reshoot as well. We shot it one time, and production design manufactured these awesome little like demonic trinkets, these little like pagan stick figure things. These little, I don't know what you'd call them, but these little stick made like designs. These little things that were hanging from all of the trees, and they were filming them as they walk through, which in my mind kind of motivated why the camera was rolling again. But we were in Daly's. I think it was one of the days that Dustin EP came to Daly's, and we were watching that, and kind of at the same time, he and I both kind of looked at each other and realized, yeah, this is we can't use this. This is too Blair Witch. It's like, as much as we already are sort of direct ripoff of the Blair Witch Project, that might be a bridge too far. So we had to go back and reshoot it without the trinkets. There's a lot of talk about what these stocks were going to be, and what we actually ended up going with here were constructed by, again, our production design crew for this. So they're newly made and just aged. But there was also, it isn't even the way that they look, which is, I think they look fine, but it's the fact that people didn't know what stocks were. Like in the script, there was a note that I'd gotten at one point. Somebody said, I thought that you had misspelled socks because I didn't know what a stock was, which, doesn't matter once you see it. Once you see it, everyone recognizes, oh, that's those things I've seen in, turn of the century, Dickensian era, British kind of films and television. But when Pastor Youngblood mentions it, the question was always, are people going to know what he talks about? And I think where I landed on it was, it doesn't really matter the device by which they were bound. The important thing to take from that scene is just that he murdered his 3 children. The means by which he did that isn't as important as gathering the information of what is going to ultimately unfold as Mark's sinister plan. We shot a lot of takes of this scene. Again, this is another one of those things where you have all 4 of your principals playing out, probably a 6-7 page scene, all from one uncut angle, and we couldn't, we couldn't cut to coverage or anything. It had to all play out like a stage play, like a theater play. It had to all play out in this take, and everyone had to remain in the frame just right and hit their marks and get their lines, get the timing right. And we shot this all morning. We broke for lunch and came back and continued to shoot this scene, I remember. And we got it eventually, and kudos to these guys for being troopers and bearing with me as I tried relentlessly to get this take just right. I think the only thing that we had to do is ADR a few of Teddy's lines in this scene to match the intensity with which he kind of has his little momentary break. I don't know if Ace did this in rehearsal, but just at one point, just in the midst of this heated moment between the four of them, he just Mark walks off and he just pulled out a Black and Mild and lit it up like he just needed to chill out, and I thought it was great. I said you have to do that in every take. She really slaps Brooke in this scene. He requested to be actually practically slapped, and I think by take 45 he was regretting that decision. The Millbrook Factory. The original title for this film was The Millbrook Summoning. The original title, before we even had a script, was Devil May I, which now bears no resemblance to the film. It was supposed to be tied to the ritual that they participate in. Devil May I have so-and-so. It's part of what you would do to make your wish. And something happened with that title. There was something with the copyright on that title or something. And Dustin, during early in prep, came out to Atlanta, and we were going through some stuff. And he said we really need to think of a new title for this thing. And I'd seen some other movie. I wish I could remember what it was, but it had a very similar title. It was like the insert setting, insert theme, right? And I knew that the place that we were filming in real life was called Millbrook, and so I kind of came up. I can't remember if it was on the spot or if I'd thought of it before and just brought it up then. But I said, I really think The Millbrook Summoning could be a cool title, and everyone liked it. So we all throughout production and sales and everything, the film was called The Millbrook Summoning, and then our distributor. Recommended our North American distributor recommended that we change the title to include I believe a number or the letter A at the beginning, and so we placed our trust in them, cooked up a few titles that met their criteria, and the one that they chose was First Summoning. So that's what the movie is called in the United States and Canada. I believe you still find it as The Millbrook Summoning if you are in Europe or overseas anywhere. This scene was interesting because this tunnel is very real. It really runs underneath the factory. The only thing that we took liberty with is the fact that it comes out the other side across the street, and we made it have a hard stop and a door to enter the facility. But it's solid concrete and it's underground, so the wireless feeds by which the cameras would send the image back to us in Video Village they'd walk 25 feet into this tunnel and we'd lose signal just like that. So this became a scene where we did watch playback obviously after each take, and I'd give them notes, but for the most part I was just kind of just sitting there outside waiting and letting the actors kind of run wild and do their thing. I just kind of, at one point, I think we had gotten a fairly solid couple of takes, and I said, just, go in there and do whatever you want to do. And, they went in and came back out like 10 minutes later or something. We were all waiting. We pulled up the playback, and they had found a drainage pipe that was big enough that you could fit a person in, and Teddy had attempted to crawl into this drainage pipe, and it was actually pretty great. I wish we could have found a way to use it, but we'd have had to go back in there and try to light it somehow and get them all to climb up into this pipe, and I just felt that it was probably too much. We needed to get into the facility as quickly as possible because, again, we're at 1 hour into the film, and they're just now entering the facility, which was it's a ballsy plot move to stay out of your tentpole set piece until 2/3 of the way into the movie, but I felt like we could sustain it. I don't know that we do, but that's what I felt at the time. I really, really love the way this scene looks. I mean, it's lit, obviously. We're subtly augmenting the sunlight that's coming in, but a lot of what we're seeing here is just that nice soft sunlight coming in through the windows. I love how you can just barely see the mountains and the vast emptiness out behind them, and we did pump some diffusion, some fog into the room to kind of give it that flatness. And I love this scene. I love how it all came together. I think this was a reshoot. I can't remember if I hate doing these things where you like manipulate actors to get performances out of them. I know that some people work that way, and that's great, but I just prefer to be completely honest and upfront with people and trust them to give me their best. And I think that this is one of the scenes where I think I maybe broke with that, and at one point had them wander around and then actually like threw some metal object against a wall to make a sound that, I mean, it was ultimately kind of stupid and silly to even try that without, make a sound without telling them, because they all know we're here to make a movie. But I think that was the one scene that I did that. This is a locker room set that it was written in the script that there's a locker room. The only thing that this facility did not have was a locker room. So this set is completely constructed from scratch on a stage, and I think you can tell. Which again, I'll take full responsibility for, but it just seems very fabricated to me. I was a real stickler all throughout production, and I think production design probably wanted to murder me a time or two. But I was a big stickler of avoiding the color red in our all of our set dressing, and in every instance that we could, I wanted, unless it was blood, I didn't want to present anything that was red on screen. And this proved to be very challenging. There's a lot of stuff that we have control over on the set, and we can dress stuff without using the color red. But there's also a lot of times when we're shooting in real environments and there's signs on windows and stuff that we just weren't able to go in and paint over or remove, because we just didn't have the money to pay people for the trouble. So we'd go in visual effects or in the DI and the color grade and key out all of the red as much as we could, make it desaturated or push it to brown or something else, because I really wanted red to mean something when you see it on screen. It's it's constraint. It's constraint in filmmaking. This sign is another one of these happy little accidents that we stumbled upon. There was a real sign. It was in there, and we just placed it there. And of course, it offers some not so subtle foreshadowing to the room later that they find themselves in, that's full of chains and hooks. All this sound was added in, but it really is what the place sounded like. We were essentially like, we'd work really hard to get clean audio where these creaking metal beams and things falling on the roof weren't jumping over the actors' lines, and then we'd go back in and the sound design, and we'd have to search and find sounds that I thought matched the way it really sounded in there. But you want to do that. You want to have you want it to feel real, but you also want to have complete control over it, and that's the beauty of digital filmmaking, is that you can rearrange reality. This rooftop scene was the one time we had to employ local law enforcement to shut down a road for us. They shut down, there was like a state highway just off to the side of the facility here, and in order to maintain that veneer of being in an isolated, remote setting, we didn't want any cars or noise bleeding into the dialogue, into the scene. So they'd hold traffic, and then in between takes they'd let traffic go, and at one point we looked off to the side and a tractor was driving down state highway. There's just this giant tractor driving on the road. Thought it was hilarious. Teddy started doing this thing where he puts his fingers against his temple when he's angry in the scenes, and it sort of had the right balance of being like fake, because he's acting. The whole thing is that he's orchestrated this whole endeavor, and a lot of his reactions are staged, and he's the thing is, I always wanted there to be, as far as the motivation of the character of Mark, I always wanted it to be, well, he knows that his two friends have betrayed him. We're led to believe that he's aware that Ryan and Leslie have had something going on behind his back, and that he found out by locating some footage of them that came from somewhere. And what I always thought was, he's someone who already clearly has some mental issues, and that is only exacerbated by the stress that he's put himself under in terms of his career. And then he, of course, finds out that, again, his two friends have stabbed him in the back. And I like the idea that kind of pushed him over the edge. That kind of pushed him into this psychotic break where he then cooked up this idea that he needed to participate in this ritual and sacrifice his friends in order to have a successful filmmaking career, but that really what might be happening is that he's cooked up this idea as a justification for exacting revenge on the people who betrayed him. And of course that means that Ace is collateral damage at that point, but that's the way I always kind of envisioned the inner workings of what's going on here. So it was always important that Teddy kind of always be behaving in this performative manner, and in a not a particularly good performance. And so I really love those little idiosyncrasies that he developed as far as how he would react when he's trying to be perceived as being angry, so as to divert some of the blame or divert the attention away from himself to the quote supernatural.
This isn't about me, okay? You can't tell me you think this is a good idea.
Okay, someone has to do it now.
Then you do it.
No, it can't be me. All right, I have to be an ejected party.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the film will lose.
I don't know if this ever really comes through, but what's supposed to have happened in the film is that Mark has already done this, and he's come here and he's done this ritual himself already, and his wish that he made was for this film to be successful, because he's frustrated with, like many of us, he's frustrated with where he's at in his career, and wants and believes that, for whatever reason, believes that this is the way to make a deal with the devil to have a film be successful, but then realizes that he also has to make a film in order for him to have a successful film, and so drags his friends out, not for the purpose of making a wish, with making a deal with the devil, which he's already done, but for the purpose of giving him material with which to make a film.
What the fuck you doing?
I always like the idea of just hearing this chaos, this madness, while the lights go out, and just kind of see maybe just a flurry of images and some digital distortion, knowing that something crazy is going on. It's very Hitchcockian, I think, in a way. Not to say that we, not to compare us to Hitchcock in any way, but just the idea that something horrifying is probably happening, but we can't see it. So what our imagination conjures up is probably more horrifying than what we would have been able to show. And of course, the caveat being that Marcus orchestrated all of this, and that there's really not anything to show, that he's just stepping off to the side to let them try to find their way out of this facility. This is the part where we start to introduce actual score into the films and creative sound design, which, like I said, I was kind of against for a really long time, but it just felt right when we started to see the cut and Jeff started to place it in there, and we did reel it back a bit, but it just felt right. And if if I'm going back to the foundational structure of what the film is and why it exists, Mark has put this together himself and is trying to release it to capitalize off of it. And it stands to reason that Mark would spice it up with his own effects and sound design and whatnot. So I think it works. And I think it works better than trying to make it completely scoreless picture. Yeah, the whistle. So the whistle is something that we didn't come up till very, very late in post-production. In the script, it says that as Pastor Youngblood is walking through the cemetery back in the beginning of Act 2, he is whistling some old tune. I can't remember what it was. It's like a 50s tune, something that we almost definitely weren't going to be able to get the rights to. But we had him whistle that on the day, and I don't remember if there was. I think it might have just been a completely arbitrary tune that was just put in there. And one of the things I always wanted to do was during the end credits have this sort of like Gregorian chant, this musical Latin chant at the end. And Jeff Jones and I found this really great piece of this, and it's true Gregorian chant. You can find it on YouTube. Look up the lyrics. And Jeff put together this small like choir of vocalists, and actually it's an original recording. I love it. It's one of my favorite parts of the film, the end credits. But I loved the song so much that there was some point during the very last final stages of sound design where I said, what if can you get someone to come in and whistle that tune? He's like, yeah, I think I can probably find someone to come in and do that. I said, well, what if we replace Pastor Youngblood's whistling in the cemetery with that Gregorian chant? People won't know what it is yet. They'll just think it's a strange chant. But it makes more sense. It actually lends itself to the story and what's going on better than just this random 50s tune. So we did that, and then in the process of doing that, I'd come up with this idea like, what if we employed the rule of three, the rule of thirds, and had it come back a couple of times, and so it does, and it really kind of strings together this whole plot line of Ace with the necklace. He takes the necklace, but he doesn't remember taking it, and it's in his pocket, and then he's split up from the rest of the group in the facility here, he's being followed by that whistle, which we can presume is Pastor Youngblood or a follower of his tormenting Ace during his final night on Earth. I really like this. I guess I'm starting to understand that I have a fetish for shrines. In my last film, we did a similar thing where we had a shrine set piece, and this was written in the script, and I thought they did a really good job of. I mean, it's really basic, obviously, but I didn't want it to be super adorned. I just wanted it to be kind of this thing that this cult in this small town put together. And of course the necklace comes back there. It's this great moment for that to happen. Barefoot Bill. So Barefoot Bill, anyone who's familiar with the thespian scene here in Atlanta, or the film and TV actor scene here in Atlanta, is probably familiar with Barefoot Bill. Actually, he and his wife are both in this film, both stark naked. And he has, I guess, a reputation for acting in films and showing up barefoot to set, and got the name Barefoot Bill. He's a wonderfully eclectic guy, and both of them are. They're a wonderfully eclectic couple that's kind of willing to do whatever you need them to do in service of the story. And so I appreciate them for coming out in November into northern Arkansas and walking around in the freezing weather, completely stark naked. It's actually myself and Ace banging on the door on the other side there. So I guess you might consider that my second cameo, but kudos to our colorist Tawan Bazemore. We were watching a rough cut of the film, and I just kept thinking, like, I think Bill's genitals are just kind of too prominent in this GoPro witness cam shot, and so I asked him if, reluctantly asked him if he'd be willing to track this area of the screen that contained Bill's genitals and darken them a bit so that they weren't quite so prominent. Not necessarily out of a desire for censorship of any kind, but just because it was distracting. I just thought it needed to be toned down just a bit.
What the fuck was that?
Weaving together this set was it's a meticulous task to do, because we're not actually spatially. This is split over like 3 or 4 different buildings within this complex, but we had to string it together as if it was all one cohesive setting. And so I've worked really hard to try to like put together a map of how this hallway would connect here and how we'd connect this room to this place. And I think at the end of the day it doesn't really matter, because you're so disoriented as a viewer anyway. You're not able to kind of create that cinematic geometry, that spatial awareness that you can in a film by starting with a wide shot and then working into coverage. You're kind of restricted to this limited point of view, and I just don't think that it required as much work as I put into it to try to make everything kind of make sense spatially. I think it actually kind of plays in our favor that it doesn't. I mean, for instance, this hallway and this room are 2 completely different facilities, and there's a cut hidden there that kind of brings us into it. But I don't know that there's a point where we're trying to work up a map that they would find on the wall at one point, like an escape route map, and I wanted it to be very, very specific. And if you were to pause it and look at that map and try to trace where they were going through, like, I know people have done this with The Shining. People have looked at the architecture of the Overlook Hotel in The Shining and determined that it's structurally like impossible for windows to be where they are, hallways to be where they are, and I think that it's okay. I think that works there, and I think it works here as well. Again, not to compare us to The Shining at all, but just from a structural point of view. The cult here is our crew. Many of our crew members in robes and masks. This shot was another one of the ones that was in my mind from day one, where just how unsettling it would be to be in this vantage point where you think you're completely concealed, and you have this glass partition in the way so no one can hear you or see you, and that somehow still this entire cult down 100 feet below you in this warehouse turns in complete unison and looks directly at you. That would unnerve me, I believe. A lot of the camera operating that is implied to be Leslie operating the camera is actually Randall Blizzard, our DP, operating himself with Haley Lovett, who plays Leslie, right behind him. So it's 2 people, 2 people playing one character kind of at the same time. You have, an experienced camera guy who's trying to embody this character, and she's behind him providing the vocalizations and the giving an eye line and an actor for, in this case for Brooke Todd to play off of. It's just so interesting. I mean, and it's really, a big testament to how good Randall is, that he's able to act. He's a cameraman, but he's a character also. He's acting as Leslie and does a damn good job at it. everything is lit. This whole thing looks very sort of abandoned. It's meant to look like the power has been shut off, but it's lit. Our lighting and grip team did some really cool inventive stuff where they would go up into the ceilings and remove tiles and then rig these LED panel lights up in the ceiling at certain angles and at certain intervals that made it just look like, sunlight or, later on moonlight is peeking through like holes in the ceiling or holes in the wall or something, or windows and stuff. I thought it worked really well. And we did a lot of tests and stuff beforehand because I hate how artificial moonlight looks in movies. But you have to be able to see things, and you can do a lot by buying into the idea that these lights on the front of the cameras are powerful enough to give you proper exposure even in complete darkness. But you also want to have the ability to kind of creatively shape light and create a mood, create a filter through which you're witnessing the story. And as much as the film is supposed to feel real and very sort of on the fly observational, I did also want to have that sort of cinematic veil that you see in some of the best films, some of the most visually captivating films have this sort of like lens through which it's viewed. That's a color or a style, and I wanted to incorporate something like that as much as I could within the limitations of what we were trying to do. And I think we pulled it off pretty well. The person playing that last cloaked figure that you see at the end there is Babacar, one of our second ADs, I believe, and he suited up and landed on his mark perfectly. I thought that was, and the way that he snaps his head directly toward camera. So you think he spotted her and then walks off. I thought he did it excellently. This is the third time that we hear the whistle. It's the third time I thought that we could reintroduce that. So we know that someone's in the bathroom. Just where are they? And, at what point of absolute silence do you feel safe enough to go back out and explore? And it's another situation where clearly, like in a bathroom, there's no light. So a lot of the scenes happening in almost complete darkness, and I like that idea. I like the idea of experiencing what this character is experiencing. You don't really get to do this in narrative filmmaking. You have to. It's narrative filmmaking a lot of times is an implied notion of reality. So you're not in darkness with a character. You're probably seeing a character experiencing darkness, a representation of darkness. And in this, what I wanted to do was actually present actual darkness. So you're in the point of view of the character experiencing what they're experiencing. I think Ace delivered this dialogue in real time in the location, and I can't remember if we went back and dubbed it or not, but both times he did an excellent job for a non-actor being aptly terrified. I don't know, we get a jump scare there. Kind of copped out a little bit, and I think sped things up in visual effects, but I was never really happy with that reveal and jump scare. A lot of people think that that's a tooth lying right there in the middle of the frame. This is one of my favorite frames of the film. In fact, there's a point, there was a version in which at the very end of the end credits, there's a after credits sequence, quote unquote, which is just a shot of that shot static as the light is dying, the on-camera light is dying, and we fade slowly into complete darkness. And I think, I don't know at what point it got removed from the cut, but I always liked that if people were willing to stick around through the end of the credits, is a little payoff to what I think might be one of my favorite compositions, certainly, in the film. And of course, it's supposed to be completely random, like the camera just spinned and landed there, but I thought it landed very nicely. And the way that the paper like flies up as he's being dragged out of the room, I thought was just perfect. complete silence. All this sound is dubbed in. Of course, this is where we're going to be making use a lot of the GoPros that we set up, because I always loved this idea. She's hiding the camera underneath the cloak, and we just see this really subtle outline of the fabric covering the lens as she's kind of, and we just kind of like barely hear her kind of whimpering as she's, not whimpering, but like breathing nervously as she's walking with him, trying not to be discovered as an imposter. I always like that idea. You don't ever, I don't think you ever see that really necessarily. You're hiding, the camera is the audience kind of hiding, masking their identity along with the character. I just thought it was an interesting way to play that. This scene, the camera operator is actually our gaffer. He I think had a desire to get behind the camera at some point, so we kind of said, why don't you do this? And we gave him the camera and had him run through. Jordan Ely. And he did a great job. I think we sped it up maybe a little bit to give it a little bit more urgency in the edit, but I thought it worked out really well. This scene, yeah, I don't know. It is kind of creepy to find Mark just kind of in the middle of the room facing away from us. Not seeing someone's face when they're acting very strangely is kind of scary in its own way, but what was supposed to happen, what was actually originally scripted, is that a ring of fire is lit up around him, and it's supposed to appear kind of, it could be this supernatural thing, or it could be like a lit fuse that just ignites into this circle of flames. And we tried a lot of different stuff. We tried to make that work a lot of different ways. We'd done at one point this thing where we'd gotten burlap and made this like long, almost rope of burlap, and soaked it in kerosene and lit it on fire, but you could only do it once, and then like you're supposed to be able to relight it, but we can never get it to reignite properly. And we tried that. We tried, I think someone without my consent, or I don't know where they got the idea to do this, but actually I think tested using gasoline at one point, which obviously was not going to be an option. I mean, Teddy, to his credit, was willing to do basically whatever we asked him to do, but we never landed on something that I felt was going to be A, safe, and B, was going to give us the amount of reuse, the amount of takes that I thought we were going to need to pull it off. So what it actually ends up being, I'm just never really happy with. You see him sitting there, and then all of a sudden these characters appear, and there's this digital distortion, and it's really all just kind of a Band-Aid over something I never felt was a good sort of culmination of everything that had happened up to that point. But I just kind of shrugged it off, saying that if you've been with us this long, then I guess you're in it to the end anyway. I love this. That you think that maybe the movie's over, and that I've really, really always wanted to do this thing where the camera just sits here in complete, absolute silence for an uncomfortable amount of time. You're probably expecting end credits at this point. You've been trained to kind of expect end credits, and then just sharply there's this loud noise and this jerky movement of the camera straight backwards, which I've seen done in other things, but not necessarily from in that particular way, in that context. I think it gets one of the bigger scares in the movie. Of course, this scene is what the whole entire movie was predicated on. This scene was kind of the idea that was pitched to me when Dustin asked me if I wanted to make this film. He said, this is the ending. Can you get us here? And so, that was the challenge throughout the whole process, was can we get to this final image of the static shot of three people bound in stocks as their friend meticulously and methodically walks through and one by one murders each and every one of them with an axe. And I think, it was a terrifying sort of thing to behold. And we did it a bunch of times, obviously, to get, because there's so many little things you have to pick up on. You have to see the little set life bracelet that we had made up. So there was any question that it was Mark. You know what's funny though is that you see his shoes, and because that there was an ad lib in the opening scene of the film where Leslie says, "Oh, these fucking shoes," and because she wears these silly little slip-on shoes. I think I told her at one point, just point out how stupid his shoes are. And then somebody in one of our, showing a friend or something, and they said, "Oh, those are Mark's shoes." And it never occurred to me that she points them out so people would recognize them potentially later. But it actually kind of served as something that tipped people off. And, that's just, I always find that kind of stuff so interesting, slip-on shoes. We procured those because I just love this idea that Mark is so tunnel vision that he can't even be bothered to waste time by tying his shoes. That little seemingly arbitrary or innocuous character choice actually almost ended up serving as a salient plot point. And that's just a testament to how important it is to be thorough and super granular with every part of telling the story, because you never know. But yeah, this is just such a hard scene to not only watch but to film. We talked about a bunch of different ways to do this. We were going to have to comp them in with visual effects. We were going to be able to make the axe swing look real, so we had devised a way to just shoot a plate of them each dying. And then we thought, well, maybe we'd have to freeze frame them, because how are they going to be able to stay almost completely still for the remainder of the scene? And again, was the axe going to look real? We're going to have to remove them and actually have Teddy walk through and swing the axe into a real object to get that real reaction and real stoppage, and then being able to pull it out realistically. And just a lot of questions were up in the air when we came to set this day. But he took the prop axe and he just did this thing where he kind of swung it and landed it on a sponge of blood on a little thing that was placed in front of, I think, in front of Ace's head, and he did it, and I was like, I don't think we need to do anything else. I think that looks real enough, completely practically. And so sure enough, that's what we did. We scrapped everything that we thought we might have to do in visual effects and green screen and all this, and just let it play out completely practically. And doing it that way was really hard to watch, because you're looking at a pretty realistic representation of the murder of these three people who are my friends. It affected me. I know this is just a silly little found footage horror movie, but that shot there at the end caused a visceral reaction from me and some of the other people watching. So I think we did service to the ending. And again, this recording was done by Jeff Jones, and an original recording of a real Gregorian chant that you could find, and I think it is the perfect button on this movie. And maybe it makes it seem like we're taking ourselves a little too seriously, and maybe we are, and I'm willing to admit that a lot of mistakes were made in the making of this. And I guess at the end of the day, it really is a character piece. I did spend a lot of time rehearsing with the actors and really trying to focus so much on the characters of the movie, because I feel like the movie I did before this failed for other reasons. Mainly that, I tried to focus so much on the visuals and the artifice of the presentation of the material and not enough on the acting. And I think that everything comes across really, really wooden, and, it was meant to be a satire. And so, it's kind of justified, but I don't think it reads well. And so I didn't put enough stock in the performances. And so in this movie, I kind of told myself to let go of the visual presentation of it, let go of the visuals and the cinematography, because it was going to be so documentary style, and really focus on the acting. And, maybe that was to the detriment of the plot. But regardless, here's the movie, and I hope people enjoy it.